And welcome to yet another episode of Starfleet Boy. Today's episode, we will have a casual and informal discussion about the Next Generation episode called The Battle. And I am joined by my guest, the Doctor. Hello, Doctor.
Hello.
Another appropriate action figure. Is that Damon Bach, or is that another?
Actually, you know what? Let me check what the file card says. I think it's just a generic Ferengi. Yeah, I think it's just a generic Ferengi. Yes.
You didn't establish communications with Tarok Nor today, so we are sans Gul Duscott. But I did speak to Gul Duscott over subspace telegraph, and he will join us on the next episode, hopefully.
Did you get any indication as to whether or not he enjoyed the episode or not?
I did not get an indication, but it's a Ferengi episode, so I imagine that he found some amusement in it.
I'm sure.
So quick little summary of the episode. The Enterprise is on its merry way, and it's suddenly the Ferengi wish to make some kind of have talks for peace, basically, or some kind of settlement between the Federation and the Ferengi, and the representative is Damon Bach. And they rendezvous, and everything's a little bit too friendly, Picard imagines, and the crew. But Damon Bach beams aboard and then provides Captain Picard with a surprise gift. But before that, there's this kind of like interesting thing about this episode where we definitely get the impression that Captain Picard doesn't like to talk about his past too much. So now we're kind of like submerged into his past. And anyways, the gift ends up being a starship, a Constellation class starship called the U.S.S. Stargazer, which was Captain Picard's previous command, and it was lost. He had to scuttle the ship. But it's now turned up again, and then Captain Picard goes into this kind of like trance that's induced by Damon Bach using forbidden technology, and he thinks he's back in the past, boards his ship, and attacks the Enterprise. It's a pretty simple story. What I think that stands out about the episode to me is definitely the story of Picard's previous command, and some of the performances, and an intriguing view into this Ferengi captain and revenge, and there's a lot of stories there. What did you think of the episode?
I've always liked it. I thought it was really good. It seems to be the first episode in this season that doesn't seem to somehow in any way mine episodes from the original series. Most of the episodes we've seen so far somehow take a page from the original show, from previous episodes, from episodes in that show. But this one, there was never an episode on the original series where you had something about, well, obviously Kirk's first. I mean, the Enterprise is Kirk's first command, right? So he could never have had a first ship. You never had anything about Scotty's first ship or Spock's, or anything like that. Like it, and also the issue of revenge. We never saw in the original series anybody take revenge on the original on Kirk or on Spock. That I'm aware of right now. So I thought it was,
at least not in the first season. I think there might be. I have a weird recollection, but nothing specific. But yeah, you're right.
On the original series?
Yeah, Nothing specific. We'll have to do some research on that one.
Okay, well, I don't recall an episode like that. So this episode seemed very original in light of what we've seen before, and I think it was a good showcase for Picard. And
it's definitely a very Picard centric episode, and a great way for us to explore more about his character.
And I liked the way he just casually talks about the Picard maneuver like it was nothing. And everybody at the table, Riker's there with a smile on his face, like, but that's in the textbook. We study it now. And Picard's just there with a pen, and he's just, we just did this, we did this, we did this. It was nothing. So I think what's interesting is, up to now we've seen a lot of Picard's. We've seen a lot of the explorer in Picard. The differences between Picard and Kirk are very interesting. Kirk was very into the running of the ship, being the captain. But I never really got a sense that he was into exploration itself. But he liked being captain of the Enterprise. I don't know if you agree or not. But that's my impression of Kirk. Now, Picard is definitely into exploration. We see that throughout the series. And we've seen it up until now. But what's interesting in this episode is now we see the reluctant warrior. He's got a very canny military strategic mind, which later we'll see pay off against the Borg. And but it's definitely a reluctant warrior. It's not, he's not someone who actively engages in strategy and all this stuff. It just kind of, he'll do it if he needs to, but he likes to be an explorer first.
I think you're absolutely right. Except I do disagree about Captain Kirk not being an explorer. I just think he's more of a swashbuckling explorer than Picard's more of a traditional, like what you imagine, Sir Edmund Hillary type person, whereas Captain Kirk, I think, is more like the fictional captain in Master and Commander. He's like more of a. You're right. He's more of a explore through adventure, and he's an adventure seeker for sure. Captain.
He's an adventurer, but he's not the Picard. You can get the sense that he enjoys collecting the data, cataloging the stuff. Kirk is more interested in commanding the ship. Obviously, yes, in the spirit of adventure and exploration, but that's not his thing. His thing is being captain of the Enterprise. You know what I'm saying? Like, if it were being captain of the Enterprise in service to another idea, he would still enjoy being captain of the Enterprise.
And you definitely get the impression that Captain Picard looks at the Enterprise as a prestigious command, but at this point, he's not necessarily, as immersed as we see Captain Kirk. Where Captain Kirk, it's like when he becomes an admiral, he's all of a sudden like a hollow shell of what he used to be. And, Bones advises Kirk, get back your command, do what you know best. And so Kirk was destined to be captain, and specifically the captain of the Enterprise. It's a very unique story, I guess, in the history of the Federation, and even perhaps in naval tradition, like you don't expect someone to be that attached to a command where you see Kirk. This episode starts with an interesting scene. After the captain's log, there's a medical examination being conducted because Picard has a headache, something that apparently is very uncommon in the 23rd century, because Dr. Crusher, she's a little surprised. She's like, I haven't seen a headache in a long time. And these headaches are kind of like the mystery of the episode. He experiences them throughout the episode, and we later discover the source of the headaches. And then there's another an interesting, fun Wesley moment that occurred where he kind of runs onto the bridge and says, Commander, you're going to get an intruder alert warning. And sure enough, there's an intruder alert warning. And then he's the one who also points out that there's a ship coming in on the long range sensors, which happens to be the Stargazer. And it was nice. It was nice to see an old style ship.
Yeah. The bridge is from the Reliant, right?
I think so, or it's something similar.
It's a redress of the Reliant.
Yeah, it's very nice.
They had the graphics from Star Trek 2 and Star Trek 3, which is really cool.
Right. Well, definitely Captain Picard was commanding the Stargazer post Star Trek 6. I mean, he would have been a cadet still, I think.
Yeah.
In that time, or maybe even just a teenager. But the Stargazer's a nice looking ship. It's got that cool, it has a saucer section, and then it has 4 nacelles. And it's you could tell it's a heavy cruiser of some kind, and could take a licking and also go pretty far. I really like that design. And then you see it later on with the update, with the kind of the cooler new nacelles. You see other ships that are kind of similar to the Stargazer, but in the Enterprise D configuration, in the Galaxy class kind of configuration, which is neat too. I don't know if I think the thing that surprises me is that Damon Bach is being awfully friendly and and very suspicious, and Wesley, he's pointing out these things, and the crew isn't really listening to him. In fact, in that scene where he points out the intruder alert, Picard kind of admonishes him and says, Mr. Crusher, and he's right. I think Picard's right. He's like,
yeah, you're absolutely right.
Yeah, you could have called this in from engineering. You may have risked by running up here to like.
It was stupid on his part. I don't know why he did that. It was like, oh, we need to include. Yeah, I mean that was Picard's absolutely right in that. Wesley's stupid.
Oh my gosh, he's so mean to Wesley.
Stupid in that scene, it's true.
But Wesley also kind of figures out that there's some kind of frequency that matches very closely Captain Picard's abnormal brain patterns, and helps the Doctor and Counselor Troy put 2 and 2 together to figure out that he's under mind control. He's being, controlled by this device.
The where that device came from is never explained. Like,
no,
who has that technology?
I bet it's the the Ferengi are traders, and they're always getting
right. So they must have gotten it from somebody else.
Could be Romulans. I'm gonna guess it's Romulan.
Because it's a strange little. It's like this thing that's like, he's like.
It's basically a sphere, and it has like these like
kind of hokey,
kind of like adjustments on it, and
it's hokey looking.
It is. It's not exactly the best device. There are a lot of moments in this episode where we see Picard very vulnerable, though, and I thought that was very well acted and kind of amusing, actually. It's a little hokey as well. What did you think of all these scenes where Picard's struggling to keep his thoughts and his mind together?
Well, I really liked. I'll tell you what I liked first is I liked the directing of the episode. It was Rob Bowman again, and the opening, like you mentioned before, when he was doing his captain's log. It starts on that shot of the aquarium of the fish, and you get this really interesting angle of Captain Picard's quarters, and I thought that was really. I thought little shots like that were really good, and then later on when Picard he's on the Stargazer, and he's beamed off the Enterprise, he's gone to the Stargazer, and you see those ghostly images of his crew, at the end. I was actually reading here, and that's the first use of Steadicam on Next Generation.
Oh, okay.
It was done by Rob Bowman, and so I thought the episode had interesting directorial touches.
I wish
And
they had used the red military style uniforms for that scene but the crew, the flashback crew, were wearing the updated uniforms.
yeah, I guess it makes you wonder how long they've been using those uniforms.
I get the impression it's not that long, but maybe it is longer than we thought. Also, I did like another detail when the Stargazer actually executes the Picard maneuver. They use the classic warp drive effect. The warp effect was the classic warp effect.
Yeah.
Nice touch. And it says something about like maybe the engines create these like spectacular phenomenon based on how they work, and those nacelles and engines make this rainbow streak as opposed to the Enterprise D, which just kind of like stretches and
Yeah, that's Stretch Armstrong thing. Like,
it's like a rubber band.
yeah, I've never really been a fan of that.
I love
I like more of the Star Trek movies, the little shimmer and rainbow.
Yeah, I like the shimmer and the rainbow streaks.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, they are cool. But I understand that like you can't really just do that. It probably costs a lot of money to do that effect.
I guess.
Or it probably did. I wonder if there is an official reason behind the change other than aesthetics and like updating.
Well, the engines are different, so maybe different engines have different. As you make adjustments to the warp,
they produce different effects.
Right. But going back to Patrick Stewart's performance, I thought it was really good. I think he doesn't look like someone who engages in much nostalgia. I mean, he says it himself. I haven't thought of this in years.
Yeah, he does. He hasn't thought of it in years. I like the scene when they first board the Stargazer because you do see on his face like a genuine like like he's back home in a sense like. And I think that like it was something that he regretted, which having to scuttle the ship, and then he thinks it's just lost out there, and then to have found it.
Yeah. Also, I was struck by the other character who I think made an interest, kind of stood out, was Riker. In these early episodes of Next Generation, I think the show is still trying to decide, not trying to decide, but they're trying to navigate the idea that the main character may be split in two. In the original show, Kirk was the captain. He did all the captain stuff. But on this show, you have two people really doing the captain stuff, because Riker's the one that goes down on the planet. Riker's the one who does the action. But you have Picard on board the ship making the decisions and maybe doing some of the, some other stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in this episode, we see Picard is vulnerable, as you said. And then they had those scenes where Riker was speaking to the first officer on the Ferengi ship. He's the one that figures out, wait a minute, there's something unusual here with this Ferengi captain being so generous. And I thought it was interesting that, they gave that to Riker to kind of, so he's still in the picture. He's still somehow driving something of the plot with his speaking to the first officer on a secure channel, one-to-one, and the way he kind of and he picks up on it right away, because he says something like, wow, you guys gave away a bargain or something, and the first officer's like,
the first officer, Kazago, was, I thought, actually a great. The Ferengi are different in this episode than when we first meet them. They're a little bit more like the DS9. They're heading more in the direction of like, not just like kind of like, they're less bumbling and humorous in a slapstick kind of way. I think here that they're more sophisticated, and I like that they present the Ferengi this way. The actor who plays the captain of the Ferengi, Damon Bach, he's actually also, I read that he also comes back on Voyager. Like he's another he plays another Ferengi on Voyager.
Really?
Yeah, and apparently another nefarious, like a nemesis type Ferengi. I guess when we get to Voyager, we'll find out. You won't be there, but
Yeah. What did you guys say about the Ferengi in the first episode? What conclusions did the two of you reach about the Ferengi and how they were introduced?
I think that was it. Is that they weren't introduced as like these kind of like beings that just traded for technology, but didn't have like the advanced sort of mindset to handle this technology. So they're like an example of what could happen if you come into technological advancement without having a more advanced mindset or approach from your ethos. So here you have these like traders who are only interested in profit, who now all of a sudden can travel through the stars. So there's a lot of like misunderstanding, hot-headedness, things like that. And here you get a different kind of Ferengi. You can already start to see the change. And I think Quark is the best representative of what I think a Ferengi should be like. Sophisticated, but also still, culturally they're profit driven, right? So there's all these interesting kind of like things. I guess much like the human / Federation have the Prime Directive as their leading example of how to act. The Ferengi have probably a similar one that the rules of acquisition.
The rules of acquisition.
Yeah, yeah, it's like
right.
Those are things that are starting to appear into the Ferengi and make them more interesting that we didn't get at all in the first episode. I thought that the meeting on the bridge was pretty cool too, because they beam over and Captain Picard introduces Riker as his first officer, and then he introduces Troy as his second in command.
No, Data as third in command, and then he introduces the counselor. And while we're on the subject of Troy, I'm gonna have my bashing Troy moment here.
Oh, yeah.
I really hated the moment when they initiated contact with the Ferengi, and Damon Bach suggests, he says, well, you can either come over here or we come over there. And Troy turns around and gives this order to Yar. And I was like, who the hell is she to do that? How dare she do that to Yar? Like, who the fuck is she? No offense with the F word there, but I'm like, I thought that was just, I still don't understand where the ship's counselor rests on the ship's hierarchy. It doesn't it doesn't make any sense to me, and I was kind of surprised by that.
It's very interesting. I think she falls under partly under medical, because Dr. Crusher points out in this episode that she's the only person that can on the ship that can relieve Captain Picard,
which dates back to the original show
of duty, right? Well, and I think that's if there's medical personnel. I don't know if this is true for current Navy.
Not sure.
Oh, really?
I don't know.
Oh, okay. I don't know if it's true, if Star Trek gets this from military procedure that's U.S. naval or other naval procedures.
Oh, it could be true on a submarine, because I think that's the only situation where you would actually just be so isolated, because they go for those tours of duties where you're essentially cut off.
So the doctor would be able to relieve a submarine.
Yeah, because again, this is not going on. This is going on the Hunt for Red October now, which I don't know if is a legitimate story. But isn't what's his name?
Oh yeah, Tim Curry, right?
Tim Curry, right? He's one of the So I'm basing this on another Paramount product.
Well, okay, but it makes sense, it does make sense. So the doctor does establish that. I think that Counselor Troy doesn't have those powers, but probably she can advise the Doctor and say, you know, with her special unique abilities, coupled with the fact that she's, you know, the ship's psychologist, she can say, hey, Dr. Crusher, I don't think the captain's fit for duty. And then Dr. Crusher will really...
But my thing was when she gave the order to Yar, the captain of the ship is engaged in communication with the with another ship, and she takes action without even notifying him, without like tapping him on the shoulder. She just turns around and directly orders Yar to cut off communication, and then says the obvious. Captain, I sense
deception or whatever.
and I'm like, duh.
Well, okay, so I think that that's a great difference, though, and like I think this is a prelude to something we see later on with the Next Generation crew in general. The Captain Picard's style of command is a little bit more. While he does enjoy procedure and structure, I think we're starting to see like how much he trusts his bridge crew, and you know the core group, and so he might be a little annoyed or perturbed by this, but I think in the end he realizes, you know, the counselor did this.
No, he doesn't appear to be perturbed at all. I'm the one that's perturbed. I'm annoyed. I just thought that was a breach of protocol, and it just seemed like it was perfectly okay with everybody. And obviously, you know, Troy. I mean, I understand Troy is a beta, so she has enhanced powers, but I'm assuming that ship's counselor is something that exists on other ships. And my question is, do other counselors also get this this authority that she does? I don't think so.
We don't really see a ship's counselor having as much of a role anywhere else on Star Trek, as far as I know.
No, not at all.
This is the first time, so I wonder if it is a unique position to the Galaxy class exploration vessel. Or this
you think it's only for Galaxy class vessels?
Or maybe it's just for this mission, you know, this particular mission. They are going out into, we have to remember that like they're going out into what's roughly uncharted space, you know?
But it's interesting I mean, I hate to bring up Voyager, but Voyager seemed to have no ship's counselor. So I'm wondering if they considered the ship's counselor just or at least the idea of the ship's counselor on the bridge, a failed experiment, because the Voyager was meant to go out into deep space, and they certainly have no counselor and made no attempt to appoint a new one, because I mean, the argument can be made that the ship's counselor was killed.
Right.
Because I know they lost a lot of life in the pilot, but then Janeway made efforts to, well, okay, whomever we have from the Marquis, they will fill in the empty slots left. And nobody said, oh, we need someone for the ship's counselor. Let's get Kess. But it was not something that was felt it was needed. So
it does seem pretty unique to the Enterprise D crew and like this mission. So yeah, you're probably right. Maybe it wasn't something that Starfleet necessary, or maybe Captain Picard requested it because maybe he realizes that you know, there's value in having a ship's counselor. I don't know. I'm not sure. I do believe that I do believe ship's counselors probably exist on other ships, but they probably aren't as integral to the. They're not bridge crew. I don't think so. You know, I don't know. Maybe the first officer does the job, or the doctor does both. You know,
there's a ship's psychologist in the original show.
Oh.
In the second pilot, remember Sally Kellerman, the blonde, is the ship's psychologist. When Gary, what's his name? When the guy gets the godlike powers, Kurt's friend.
Right. Oh,
Kirk calls the ship's psychologist because he's having trouble. He's having Q problems. He's, you know, so he calls the ship's psychologist, and it's her. But you know, so I don't know if maybe Roddenberry remembered that, and said, "Oh, we had a ship's council, you know, like in the original pilot, and that was something we just never developed." And he thought, well, you know, now we have a second shot at this, let's do it the way I originally intended. I don't know. I would be curious to know.
I'm curious as to, so like talking about ship's protocol, when they beamed over the captain's belongings from the Stargazer, no one thought to do a security check.
No one checked. No.
Like, oh, you know, maybe we should just do a security check on this and make sure there's nothing weird in here. And like,
it was pretty big, the sphere. I'm surprised Picard didn't find it himself.
Yeah, well, he didn't have a chance to look through his things.
No, he looked a little bit through it.
Oh,
remember, he picked something up. He's looking at an old yearbook or something, and and then there's this gigantic glowing sphere that he manages to miss. But of course, he is tormented by a headache. So, you know.
I do like that the Battle of Maxia is like in the history books already, and Captain Picard, you know, the Picard maneuver, which we touched on earlier. I thought that was a pretty cool scene, establishing, as you said, Captain Picard as, you know, having a strong military and strategy, you know, background as well.
Yeah,
not as evident in his day-to-day character. And that was a good scene also, where he is, you know, kind of recalling, you know, and he just kind of says, well, it's a necessity. And then later on, later on when he's totally under the influence of this mind control device and back on the Stargazer, and he's about to initiate the Picard maneuver, I thought it was kind of funny because, you know, Riker says, well, what's the defense strategy? And Data says, there is no defense against the Picard maneuver. And so Data has to formulate one in like a few seconds. And it has the virtue of, like, you know, when a kid is trying to punch you and you just hold their head like this, and they're taking swings at you. And so that was like the solution, basically, is they tractor beam the Stargazer out in front of the Enterprise, and so it's able to do very little damage to the Enterprise. But then here, Riker actually breaks through. So like that was kind of an interesting thing. You know, his appeals to the first officer apparently worked, because the first officer does some investigation and then detains the Damon Bach. The first officer's name was Kazago, I think, right? Kazago. And so Kazago detains Damon Bach and, you know, informs Riker of this, and then wishes him luck. Basically, you know, and I like his reasoning for detaining him. He's like, for unprofitable venture.
I got the impression that the door was left open for that Ferengi first officer to come back, maybe as a captain, and then it would have been, there could almost have been maybe a plot where there could have been a plot where Riker would have said, well, you know, you owe me your captaincy because I'm the one that cleared Damon Bach off the you know, off the ship for you, and you took over. Like, it could have been, it would have been an interesting relationship if the Ferengi had been successful, which obviously they weren't on Next Generation.
They weren't, yeah, but we do still get some Ferengi episodes in later seasons. I mean, they do keep coming back, and I did like the humor. There was some humor that was that stood out when Kazago he says, "As you humans say, I'm all ears."
That was funny.
That was pretty funny.
Go ahead.
So yeah, no, they were interesting. Again, more they were fleshing the Ferengi out more, and I thought that was really interesting. And so then that's it. Well. Anyways, Commander Riker breaks through and signals Picard, and then kind of gets him to wake up out of his mind control spell for a minute to notice the silver sphere. And I thought this was a little too dramatic. Like, he's kind of, you know, he's like staring.
I mean, the phaser?
Yeah, and then he blasts it, and then there's this huge explosion that knocks him off his feet.
Yeah.
And I thought that was like a little overly dramatic.
I I thought it was great. I want to get back to, if you don't mind, I want to get back to the Ferengi. I was doing some thinking about the Ferengi and the success and, you know, failure of the Ferengi. And, you know, I was thinking, you know, what is it about the Klingons that made them so successful? And I know that now the popular thinking is that they are surrogates for the Soviets back then, especially after Star Trek VI. But I would wager that it's not just that, but the Klingons also represent imperialism. And Roddenberry was making a case that the Klingons were not an adversary of the U.S., but the Klingons were a representation of what the U.S. could become if they gave into their imperialistic tendencies, if they didn't become more involved in world affairs like through the United Nations, which is basically what the Federation is, right?
Right.
So if we take that, then we look at the Ferengi and we have to think, well, what was Roddenberry thinking? What was the existential threat that the Ferengi represent to the U.S. rather than them being a surrogate for some country or whatever in our world? And I think it's definitely capitalism and giving into giving into pure capitalism. And I thought that was very interesting because that I guess the show just wasn't. I guess the show writers just didn't really know how to articulate that in effective plots for Next Generation. Because I mean, it's easier to turn imperialism into plots, as they did through the Klingons, but to turn the idea of capitalism as something that you should, not capitalism but pure capitalism, like unchecked capitalism, into a threat, I think is a lot harder. And it's interesting because we've seen a lot up until now, little lines of dialogue here and there saying that the Federation doesn't use money and this and that, so sort of setting up the idea that the economics of the Federation are very different and don't rely on capitalism. People do things for it's almost like the Ferengi are the ultimate mutant manifestation of Trump. I mean, they're just
some interesting thoughts there, and parallels. I agree with you. The Federation and citizens of the Federation is interesting because what has happened though is that humans, which are kind of like one of the core races of the Federation, until the formation of the Federation, humans were still struggling, I think, with many of the perils of resource management and capitalism, things that come with capitalism. And when the Federation was created, with the Vulcans and like these other species, now you had a way to now you were exposed to a different way of life. And I think the Vulcans were probably chief influencers in that. You get the impression that on Vulcan there is no commerce or trade that has to do with exchange of money. Vulcans seem to have evolved their consciousness and their thought and their mindset to a place where there is like it is a very like socialistic model, if you will, where the basics are all
provided for
and given, and that has to do with technological advancement. There are some things that are happening in real life that offer glimpses into perhaps a future that is not unlike Star Trek. If we crack the problem of energy, and if nuclear fusion is very promising, and if nuclear fusion is a successful experiment and becomes a technology, that's going to revolutionize electricity and power. You know, it's going to be something that will change a lot of people's lives. You'll be able to do things that you couldn't do before because you'll have access to more energy, so to speak. You know, the ubiquitousness of computing technology is another thing that is shaping and helping to change humanity. And it's like, you know, when I was a teenager, there were very few there were very few families that had computers, and now I, you know, think that lots of families have a computer at home or some kind of computing device because they've become so much more affordable. And you can kind of see this, you know, rolling into a point where like the things that we, you know, the things that we do, like mining, you know, dangerous jobs, like dangerous careers that, you know, humans put themselves into risk and peril, and, you know, and it creates this inequality. It's like, why? Well, you know, a miner, for example, is doing an extremely dangerous job, but their reward is not, it doesn't seem equal to their efforts, you know? You don't see miners, you know, most stories of people that are in the mining industry end up with them suffering some kind of like disease that ends their life early. And that's still a problem today. It's not as big a problem as it was, you know, 50, 60 years ago, but it's still a problem. Another thing is like, you know, here we all agree on an individual basis that like education is probably the most important societal feature and should be heavily invested in and should be, you know, something that's provided for all, yet you have many problems of access to education. And then on top of that, teachers make an obscenely low amount of money, and then have to have to teach more students than they can be effective with, you know. And so you know, there are these social issues that like you can see, if they're handled or solved across the globe, not just for the United States, but everywhere in the world, that it could be a revolution for humanity. It could, you know, it could change humanity in profound ways. And again, on an individual basis, I've encountered, you know, most people agree with that, but for some reason, society's slow moving to make these things happen. And I think that's what the Ferengi kind of are, you know, are representative of, is like a civilization that only focuses on commerce and trade. And, you know, and you see this actually, funny enough, in Deep Space Nine, when Keiko is trying to establish her school, Rom doesn't want to send Nog to school because he's like, well, you're not going to teach him anything useful. He needs to learn about commerce and like, you know, trading and
absolutely
things like that. And then Keiko kind of like poses the idea, well, imagine how much of an advantage Nog will have knowing about other civilizations. And she like is able to convince him that education is in fact a benefit, and will help him, you know, to succeed. So I do agree with you. I think what the Ferengi represent really is capitalism gone. There's been analysts and people who kind of look at history and then look at, you know, projections for the future, and they do think that like there has to be a balance between, you know, pure capitalism and all these things. I think that moving into the future, all the old sort of ideas we have and like categorizations we have, they just don't work anymore. I mean, like, you know, people are hung up on like socialism and capitalism and like thisism and thatism, when I think a true solution is more of a balanced solution that has a little bit of everything. You know, I think that we're at a point in time where we need to really kind of like reevaluate. This is personally, you know, personal feeling is like reevaluate these constructs and our attachments to them. You know,
Right.
Like we're so attached to these words like capitalism and socialism and communism, and it's like all these like meanings that are behind them. And when we've seen enough governments kind of like try things and fail, and the most successful societies seem to be ones that don't really define their system and don't really say,
Well, they are inclusive.
they're inclusive.
Yeah.
Yeah, and obviously, like democracy is like a very compelling
Hmm.
and good way. I mean, like people having a say in their society's direction is very important. So that I think is like a good foundation to build on. But as far as capitalism and socialism is concerned, I think there needs to be a new paradigm or a new kind of uh, commerce social model that works for everyone. And I think I'm happy to if I were if I were like a captain of industry of some kind, I would definitely want to reinvest in my society and make sure that like future workforces met the kind of could meet like the kind of demands that are going to be coming up with technology becoming more and more of a daily a tool to help us live our lives.
Absolutely. And I think it's a real testament to Roddenberry's vision, that, I mean, this episode, I mean, why does Star Trek hold up? You can rewatch these episodes and they still speak to something relevant today. And the fact that he could see the, the Ferengi seemed like something that today, if they were to create the Ferengi today, I think it would be a more viable race, let's say, on Star Trek. I think now we have writers are more capable of writing stories complex enough to, well, like DS9. DS9, the Ferengi came off very well. But the Ferengi were a good concept. And I think they had a good concept grounded in that criticism of pure capitalism. I think Roddenberry demonstrated a great amount of vision in knowing that was what was coming. That was the thing coming around the bend. That was the thing that we needed to, in some ways, face in order to become this great future that he envisioned, which we're still on that path, aren't we? I mean, we are still on the road to achieving one day what Roddenberry envisioned.
I hope.
And
Yeah.
now, yeah, I believe it, and I think all Trek fans believe that as well. And I think Trump's a Ferengi. And then the second thing I want to say,
Trump is definitely a Ferengi, and as a matter of fact, as he is more outspoken about his beliefs, you can see his image transforming. He looks a lot like a Ferengi.
Looks a little like a Ferengi, doesn't he? Which brings me to my other point, which is the actual design of the Ferengi. I don't know how into the design of the Ferengi you guys got into when you discussed the other episode, but I think part of the issue with the Ferengi is the design, and I think specifically their posture. When they first beamed aboard the ship, they have that hunched over, kind of, they have these strange body motions and the snarls and all that, and it just comes off as very comical. I don't see how they didn't see that.
I know. I'm not sure what the intention is, except for, again, going back to, one imagines that humans, like, kind of like Cro-Magnon type humans, or like, probably exhibited similar posture and like these like growls and snarls, more animal than more like
always come off as being comical.
Yeah,
that's why you never see that's why we don't have this plethora of Cro-Magnon and Neanderthal movies, because
right.
unless they're comedies.
Like, yeah, you're right, Encino Man or whatever.
Right.
And so again, it's like, imagine imagine if an ancient human were given access to a starship. You know, certainly the brain capacity is there to learn these things, but maybe the physiology hadn't evolved enough. And so that's like, I think, the suggestion behind the Ferengi at this point in Star Trek. And I think it's just completely missing. It missed. And they do.
Yes, utterly, completely.
Yeah.
And the other thing that I really didn't like was I think now when you look at it, it just seems creepy, is the women. And that's another reason why they reminded me of Trump. It's because I don't want to make this political, but the whole thing was like, your women wear clothes, you know, and then they cut to Riker and he has a smile on his face.
I mean,
I don't know. Emma thinks Riker's creepy, and now I'm beginning to understand why.
Well, I think that
It's just wrong, man.
The Ferengi become better as the series goes along, and they do become a beloved other species, or formidable, not formidable, but a beloved, like, outsider member of Star Trek. You know, like they
stay comical. They really always stay comical. They never. It's just fascinating to see how just the mistakes they made and how nobody was able to see it. I don't know. It's fascinating.
But at the same time, it begs the question, like, not every civilization has to be a very serious, humanitarian. Well, I'm even using humanitarian, but like, like very generous sort of like species. Like it does speak to something realistic at the same time. But while it is comical, it does speak to the possibilities in the universe are endless. You know, like you might have species that evolved in a variety of different ways, and so it's a good attempt. I just think that, like, yeah, it's a little too comical at this point, and it finds its edge and it finds its refinement finally later in DS9 when we are more intimate with the Ferengi and we get to see them, from that day-to-day life perspective. And again, I think at this point though, it's like, it is laughable. You can't take Damon Bach too seriously because of his the way he acts, like, basically.
Yeah, I mean, Star Trek works best when they have an adversary. I mean, the original series had the Klingons, a long-running adversary, as you could say. Next Generation really started to click when the Borg came on. And, you always sort of, and the Romulans also were reintroduced and became effective adversaries. So you had the Romulans and the Borg. DS9 had the Cardassians, and then later on the Jem'Hadar and the Founders and all that. And that was, you could argue that was the problem with Voyagers. Voyager, in the beginning they had I think they were called the Kazon. And they were also, it was also another species that just seemed from the very beginning, it just didn't work from their design, actual, design and look of the race to what were they about. At least the Ferengis, I think the way they were portrayed was wrong. I think you can consider there was some thought into what they represented, but they just didn't have, they just didn't think it through all the way. I mean, there was potential, but and looking back on these early episodes, I think that is really interesting to me, is to see the potential that the Ferengi had and just how it was just squandered away. I mean,
yeah. As a kid, I remember the thing that stood out about this episode. What I focused on was the historical aspects of Picard, and seeing the Stargazer was really cool, and like hearing about the Picard maneuver and things like that. And then watching it again, the only thing I could think about was I liked, again, those same themes kind of like again hit the notes, the same notes emotionally for me, but the Ferengi were just kind of like a plot device. They were just a vehicle, actually, to bring this plot about. It could have easily have been Romulans. It could have easily have been Klingons. It could have easily have been
Yeah.
any adversary that we've met up until this point.
What did you think? And I don't know if there's a specific reason. Maybe it was stated in the first episode, which I didn't see with the Ferengi. But what's the reasoning behind them being whited out? That you don't see the rest of their ship? That they always seem to be when they're communicating?
Yeah, I don't know if it's explicitly stated, and that does change in later seasons. Because if I recall correctly, in season 2 or season 3, there is another Ferengi episode in which Quark is the captain or the daemon of the ship, but not as Quark, as another Ferengi.
Oh, the actor, right?
The actor, and you actually see the ship's bridge, which is a weird configuration in and of itself. But I think at this point, yeah, the Ferengi don't want the Federation to know much about them, so their computer masks out the backgrounds.
I was reading in the well, for the record, where I get my facts is the I'll show you here, the Star Trek Next Generation Companion.
Very nice.
No Next Generation fan should be without it. The book states that there were many scenes that were planned and never filmed on the Ferengi ship. And that would have been interesting to see at this point in the series, you know, to flesh out the Ferengi by seeing what their ship was like. I mean, certainly in the original series, when the Romulans were introduced, we did see small sections of the ship that Mark Leonard was commanding, and you could extrapolate things about the Romulans just by seeing how their ship is designed. You know, what do they emphasize? What do they not emphasize? And the same thing with the Ferengi. In this episode, we only really see one room. It's kind of a nondescript room, and the focus is very tight. So you really see very little of the room. So you get no sense of the Ferengi at all.
Right.
Meanwhile, what the design of their ship is.
Yeah.
It's frustrating to me.
I don't think we ever see much of the inside of a Ferengi vessel, and the design of the Ferengi vessel itself is pretty unique and interesting. But also, it's as big as the Enterprise is. It's a huge.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, now I have to wonder, because obviously the Enterprise has an enormous crew because the ship is geared towards exploration. The Ferengi have a ship that seems to be almost equal in size. So I'm guessing they have a large crew as well. What is all that crew for? Is it just for labor in terms of, like, maybe?
I bet there's less crew on the Ferengi ship and more storage. Is what like, you know, because I would imagine that, you know, they're going on while the Federation's exploring, the Ferengi are also exploring, but they're trying to collect, you know, goods. And so,
you know, I'd never thought of that.
I mean, that's my guess, but I don't know if that's we'd have to get a technical.
You're absolutely right. I'd never even thought of that. That's true. That's true.
Yeah, they're just fancy looking cargo vessels. They're like formidable looking cargo.
What do you think of their ships? Do you like their ships?
I never liked or loved the Ferengi design. In fact, I thought it was backwards. Like, I thought they should be flying in the
way that they're. Yes, I agree with you.
Yeah, like, so I don't know, but it is like a unique design. I'll say that.
It's wrong in every way. I feel bad for. It was just a total. It's just a big failure for them. It was really bad.
Oh well, the Ferengi do get updated. Maybe the new.
They get validation later in DS9.
Yeah. And maybe the new Star Trek series will reintroduce them in a different way. You know, more like Quark and cooler designed ships. We'll see.
At least the uniforms. I never really liked the uniform. I'll show my figure again. You know, the animal skins. I thought that was a little. I don't know. It just seems. Yeah, and those little things they have behind that curtain they wear.
And this is the Ferengi, you know, the Ferengi Exploration Corps or whatever they are. They're more militaristic. We do see later on, you know, Quark wears a suit.
Right. Yeah. And he seems, yeah, it looks more normal or acceptable or viable or whatever. But these guys with their animal skins and you know this jewelry behind their head, it just seemed a little, I don't know. It just seemed like a mixed match that didn't go well together. And
Well, I think it just plays back to your point of we don't really know what the Ferengi are trying to say, through their design, like what they were trying to say through the design of the Ferengi, or at least that intention didn't come across very clearly.
no, I don't think so at all.
So the episode ends with Picard saying something to the extent of let the past remain in the past. So I think the moral of this episode is that you can't dwell too long. If you're a starship captain, you can't dwell on failed decisions or things that didn't work out in your past. You can only learn from them and keep moving forward. And I think that is the ultimate lesson. And the Ferengi are just an interesting side component. And again, well, so going back to your earlier point, like Damon Bach, there is an important plot point. Apparently, the unknown starship that the Stargazer encountered back in the day and
right.
was a Ferengi vessel, and Damon Bach's son was the commander of that vessel and was killed. And so there's his whole motivation is like he spent his whole life looking for this revenge, as he calls it, a blood revenge, an appropriate blood revenge on Picard. And again, there's something, again, it just blows up in Damon Bach's face. It's like not even really a great threat. Like, the Enterprise crew is able to dispatch the threat very quickly, and Picard is at most inconvenienced and embarrassed. And so as far as episodes go, this one was interesting, but it's not one that'll rank really high as far as I'm concerned, among my favorites.
Yeah, it's not a favorite episode of mine, but it's one that I mean, I enjoyed watching it now. If it's on TV, I'll watch it. I like it's hokey, I think they could have caught on to the whole, Picard has a headache because of something to do with these Ferengi a lot quicker than they did. Also, the whole thing about the faked log entries that Damon Bach somehow put into the computer. It seems to me that somehow the ship's computer, or at least data, would have picked up on the fact that they were just sort of, that it was artificially created a lot faster. That whole aspect of the episode just seemed to be something just to throw in there, just to grind the plot a little bit further. But I liked seeing, I don't know, I thought Patrick Stewart did a good job.
Yeah, the performance was great. I agree with you.
Him and Crusher were cool too. It was another episode where him and Crusher could exchange dialogue, and you can kind of see a little bit of something. I mean, there's definitely a relationship there that's beginning to develop that unfortunately it doesn't really come to fruition until much later, and I would say much too late to even care. But in those early episodes, I think you definitely see the format. Crusher at one point says, do you want to talk about it? I'm here. And, Picard does. And he actually becomes quite anguished about the whole thing. And I was kind of surprised. I was like, wow, Picard opening up to Crusher. This is really, I would have liked to have seen this continue on the show.
Yeah, there is this moment of vulnerability, and again, this is a side effect, I think, of the mind control device. The mind control that's happening to Picard. I do think that I want I want to point out a few things that I think Galdu Scott would have been interested in about the episode. We don't have him here, but the Wesley sweater era is over. So this is the first time we see Wesley wearing his acting ensign uniform, and it has like I think all the different command, it has the different colors represented on the top portion of the uniform that would normally be represented on the bottom portion of the uniform. The uniform's gray. So that was an interesting thing about this episode, is that we do see Wesley's wardrobe evolve from sweaters to this. And then what do you think the writers were trying to say in that one scene where he comes into sickbay and informs Counselor Troy and Dr. Crusher about what his theory is about the brain waves, and then when they leave, he makes this comment just to himself, and he's like, adults, like sighing almost. Like, what do you think that's all about?
They just needed to give Wesley a little bit of extra dialogue there, I guess. A
little credibility, maybe.
I mean, yeah, they kind of just ignore. I mean, I guess there've been moments where Wesley is clearly ahead of everybody, and the adults are just kind of ignoring him. And I think he's just finally voicing his frustration over that. And it is. I guess this was a criticism launched at the show in the beginning, and it didn't really bother me all that much back then, and it doesn't really bother me all that much now. I think it's kind of amusing.
It is amusing. I think it is funny though that Wesley is able to. You have this like extremely well-trained crew. These are supposed to be the best of the best. They're serving on a flagship starship, and this is like the equivalent of I guess like what you would call like the Google or the Apple crew. You want to get the best programmers and the top people, and here you have this like this like
who's using a Commodore or something.
Yeah. He's constantly showing them up, which is really interesting. So
and that I just want to point out on Sequest. Can we mention Sequest on this?
Yeah, why not?
They did this quite unsuccessfully with their character. It's quite obvious.
Brandon.
What?
Poor Jonathan Brandis.
Poor Jonathan Brandis, the late Jonathan Brandis. His character was obviously a ripoff of Wesley, right down to this, which is that he would be the one who would figure out what Darwin is trying to say and save the whole planet. I mean, nobody else on the submarine could figure it out, but this came
fascinating thing about Sequest and Darwin is that, did you know there are cetacean navigators on
Yes. I don't. Did I give you that book?
No, it's in the Star Trek Next Generation technical manual.
Is it?
Yes. Okay, so I want to
Did I give you my tech manual?
No, you did not. I want to remind you that this is a revelation we came to many years ago in high school.
Remember that? That was mind-blowing, man.
It was in high school. I brought the technical manual and I said, what the heck is this? There were whales. This is in a time, by the way, before the internet was like a resource like it is today, where you could just.
Could you hold on a minute? I'm being called away. Hold on a minute.
So just to kind of tell everyone what's going on in the forward section of the Enterprise, if you look on the technical manual, it shows a little tiny section, and there are navigators that are either dolphins or whales. I'm not sure exactly what they are. They're definitely somehow they assist in the navigation.
Yes, I remember that.
So that's definitely an interesting.
There's a whole section of the ship just devoted to them, and that's because of Star Trek 4, right?
I don't know. Well, I don't know the full story on it.
No, that's because of Star Trek 4.
So now there's a whale on every ship so that in case they encounter this probe again, I guess.
Right, they can communicate. They can go tell it what to go do it with itself. They need only the whales can tell that probe what to go do with itself. You know what did you go? You know, do
I don't know. We're gonna have to look into it and get back to the audience on the next episode. But yeah, the whale navigators or the cetacean navigators are very interesting. I think that about covers our thoughts for the episode, the battle. Do you have anything else to add, Doctor?
Yeah, did I mention Troy was useless?
Oh my gosh, she was not.
Yeah.
It looks like the Doctor's running out of ideas.
I think that's it. We're done. Oh, well, yeah, I do want to mention, I thought it was very interesting, the transporter of the Ferengi have a little swirl to them.
Oh, yeah, that was a really cool effect. Different.
A different effect.
To me also that how the transporter actually works on different civilizations. Like I think the Romulans have it's always been a green. There's like a greenish color to it, which is very interesting thematically. And then it's just different for every tech. It's cool to see how like there's no universal. The creators of Star Trek: The Next Generation actually thought, well, why would the transporter be the same? The effect be the same for different cultures and different species, and I like that. That's a cool feature. Yeah.
Which is your favorite transporter effect, Federation-wise?
Star Trek 2 or Star Trek 3 has the best both sound design wise and visually. I think it's just this like
sound design wise.
It looks like they're splitting your atoms apart into like it looks like
stars almost.
It's very powerful, and then that sound is just like really intense.
I love that sound. That's the best one.
The sound starts way before the actual effect, and it keeps going. It echoes right out, past the effect. It's just pretty impactful. I think those are my favorites.
I was disappointed that they didn't continue that into the Next Generation.
I loved, there was an episode of The Reading Rainbow or something where they actually went behind the scenes of Star Trek: The Next Generation.
I remember that.
Yeah. And the transporter
was late in the series too. Yeah. That was late into Next Generation. They waited a long time for that.
But they showed how the transporter effect is. It's glitter in a glass of water, and it's the glitter, and they filmed that, and that's what they use for the transporter effects, which I thought that was very cool.
Yeah. I also have a soft spot for the Star Trek one, the
oh yeah, that's right.
And it's just like warm, and you have all this stuff inside. I don't know why I've always had a soft spot for that one. It's so weird.
Those are definitely good ones too. You're absolutely
right. The Star Trek 2 and 3 ones are the best. And, yeah.
Star Trek 2 really, I think, set aesthetically a standard that to this day is really strong. And I don't know if a lot of that credit goes to Nicholas Meyer and his production team, but I would imagine it does.
Yes.
Because there was such a dramatic change from the motion picture to Star Trek 2, and I really think that look stuck. And it's a look that you really, I think, is iconic for Star Trek post series. Like the movie era.
And hopefully it will return.
That's what the rumors are, that we're going to go back to that era. So it'll be very interesting to see.
All right. Well, I guess that's all we have to say about the battle. Okay,
and then the next episode is going to be Hide and Q, and hopefully we'll have communications reestablished with Bajor and Terok Nor, and we'll have Goldie Scott on here.
The Ferengi did something to the communications, did they?
Yeah, I think there's some kind of weird subspace interference going on, and sometimes there's some interesting things that happen over there on Bajor. There's like these communication blackouts. The Cardassians might be up to some,
perhaps.
Yeah, but rest assured, the Federation has dispatched some envoys, and ambassadors.
The Corps are on their way to rectify
everything. Things are okay on Bajor. All right, so this is Starfleet Boy over and out. And again, we invite you our audience to comment, to participate, and if you want to be on an episode, please reach out to us and through our YouTube channel or starfleetboy@gmail.com so we can schedule that. Thank you.
Live long and prosper.
Live long and prosper. Have a good night.